Let's talk about Anshul Jubli versus Mike Breeden this weekend at UFC 294. This is technically Anshul Jubli's UFC debut, although the Road to UFC fight was technically a UFC fight as well, but he's going to be fighting Dana White's Contender Series alum, Money Mike Breeden. Now, as far as matchups go, this is a fight that Anshul Jubli could and should potentially win, seeing as Mike Breeden has gone 0-3 in the UFC so far. All three of those UFC losses were against really tough guys in Terrence McKinney, Natan Levy, and Alexander Hernandez. So going 0-3 against those guys isn't necessarily a terrible look, but at the same time, in two of those fights, Breeden was finished in under 90 seconds. Anshul Jubli, on the other hand, has fought exclusively in India before fighting in Road to UFC. So he's gonna look to make a long, slow run up the UFC's stacked lightweight division. We've seen Jubli cruise in Matrix Fight Night, going undefeated 5-0 there, and then 2-0 in Road to UFC. At 28 years old and 7-0, does Jubli have what it takes to go far in the UFC? I wanna give a little bit of a breakdown and write, if I can, a sort of game plan for Jubli that he could potentially follow to beat Money Mike Breeden this Saturday in Abu Dhabi. Let's jump in. So I watched several fights from both guys, and here's what I saw. For Money Mike Breeden, he has a 10-6 record. Breeden pretty much fought exclusively on the US Midwest regional scene in Kansas and Missouri before signing with the UFC. He did have that one fight in Contender Series, which he lost, and then they brought him in on short notice to fight Alexander Hernandez. And it's been a pretty rough go since there, but he's had some pretty entertaining fights and shown that he's willing to move forward and throw a lot of pressure against his opponents. He is 34 years old and currently trains out of Marathon MMA in Kansas. This is likely his last shot in the UFC. If he does not win this fight, he'll probably be cut, but that doesn't mean that this won't be at least a tough fight for Jubli in some areas, potentially. What I saw from Mike Breeden is that he has pretty good hands. He keeps his hands really high and kind of thinks of himself as a boxer in the octagon. Doesn't throw a lot of kicks or knees, or at least too often. He's mostly pressuring forward with his hands. To balance out his boxing game, he's got pretty good takedown defense and wrestling as well. So Anshul Jubli may have a hard time getting him to the ground or keeping him on the ground in this fight. What I also like about Mike Breeden is his pace. He always moves at a high pace, throws a ton of volume against his opponents, and he has really the endurance to do that. He may tire a little bit, but unless Anshul Jubli gets some kind of quick finish, he could be in for a long and tiring night against Mike Breeden. Now, for Anshul Jubli, we already know that he's beaten some of the best guys in India like Srikanth Sakar and Sanjeet Boudoir. He's also already beaten Kim Kyung-pyo, who now fights with Ryzen, and although he won that by split decision, I think that Kim could potentially be in the UFC, so that was probably his most high quality win so far. Jubli is one of those guys that grows a lot in between each fight, so you never really know what you're going to find when he steps into the cage. What I saw from Jubli is not only does he have a pretty good grappling game, but he's got a really good jab. He has a good right hook, and he likes working from range. And against Red Horse, it was like every time Kim stepped in close, he got popped by Jubli. He made him think about every time he wanted to engage. So that's a really interesting combination against Mike Breeden. If he does manage to get the fight to the ground, he's got pretty smothering top control, and like I said, has really good jiu-jitsu, hardly ever outmatched in that area, at least so far. Now, if we're talking liabilities of each guy, for Anshul Jubli, really the holes that I saw were sometimes his striking defense. Sometimes when he would throw a combination, his hands would come back low, and so Breeden may exploit that. He may try and counter Anshul Jubli and catch him at the end of combinations when his hands come down. Hopefully that's something that Jubli has been working on to keep those hands up. His takedown defense can sometimes be a little bit suspect. He can get taken down and put onto his back, and then when he actually manages to get the takedown and get his opponent on their back, sometimes he gets stuck in full guard and isn't able to do a whole lot. So when we're talking about Mike Breeden, what his liabilities are, I would say sometimes he gets too much pigeonholed into thinking like a boxer. He throws his hands, but he doesn't always throw a lot of other strikes, and he can sometimes become really predictable with his strikes. He throws a lot of punches, but not a whole lot land. That forward pressure and high volume has its advantages, but on the flip side, it also gives his opponents a lot of opportunities to counter and make reads and punish him for his forward pressure. While he's thinking in that boxing frame of mind, he keeps his hands really high, leaving his body wide open, and the legs are right there for the kicking as well. So he takes a lot of damage in a lot of his fights, which feels pretty unnecessary to me. When he fought Terrence McKinney in his last fight, McKinney tore him to pieces at range, and when that happened, Breeden just kind of froze up. He shelled up, and McKinney was able to finish the fight in less than 90 seconds, which that is a really big problem for Breeden as well. When his opponents land combinations, sometimes he just kind of shells up and he doesn't counter. So now that we briefly looked at both fighters, what kind of game plan are we putting together for Anshul Jubli to win his UFC debut? Well, what I would say is, first of all, just don't get locked into a firefight against Mike Breeden. Stay at range, choose your shots, and as Mike Breeden leaves his leg and his body open, take advantage of that. Anshul Jubli is so good at punching the body at range. That's going to be there all day for Mike Breeden. If he does decide to drop his hands and cover his body, then he can pop him with the jab as well. If the two do end up throwing some combinations, Jubli just needs to make sure that he keeps his hands up high. Make sure you don't drop, because Breeden is going to see that and he's going to punish you for it. Every time Mike Breeden pushes forward with punches, if I were Anshul Jubli, I would pop him with a right hook. I would pop him with a knee right down the middle. Make him think about it. While the fight's going on, start stacking up those leg kicks as well. Slow him down, immobilize him a little bit more. Later in the fight, if he starts to wear down, you're going to be able to freeze him and potentially get a TKO because you've invested so much in the body and in the leg kicks. So a prediction's a little bit hard for me in this fight, just because I'm not really sure what to expect from Jubli in his UFC debut, but I think that we could either see a late TKO finish or a unanimous decision win for Anshul Jubli. There will probably be a couple moments where Breeden is able to land some good combinations on Jubli, but from what I've seen, he doesn't have that like one punch knockout power. So Jubli just needs to keep his defenses up, and I think he should win a decision or a late TKO in the fight. How do you think Anshul Jubli is going to be in his UFC debut? Do you agree with my analysis? Drop your comments and your reactions to the fight, and I can't wait to watch it this Saturday from Abu Dhabi. Enjoy the fight.